Welcome to Rewilding Love. This season is with a couple on the brink of divorce.
This is episode number 24, an interview with Greg Ellis.
The CDs are called tonics, and the tracks are dosages, and the instruments are ingredients, and this is really meant to be a pharmacy of rhythm.
And what I started to realize is what the audience are responding to is just the pure honesty of it all.
We don't look at sound in the same way we look at other things we ingest.
We don't want to present as somehow that we have it all figured out and that we have the perfect relationship and that nobody does. And that's just not natural.
A music therapist, to me, is an oxymoron. It's like, music is therapy.
You've created music that's just so honest and pure and organic.
I think self-help has had its time. I think we need to get to self-discovery.
My mum was, I think, born in the 20s.
She was? Are you 100?
Nature doesn't have this standardized mechanical time that every species has to adhere to.
I think what you're pointing to is how most people are living with a constant internal pressure and hum of anxiety and insecurity.
This is podcast off the Clicktrack.
That's right.
You are listening to Rewilding Love with me, Angus Ross.
And me, Rohini Ross.
Rewilding Love is a podcast about relationships.
We believe that love never disappears completely in relationships. It can always be rewilded.
Listen in as we speak with our guests about how they share the understanding behind the rewilding metaphor in their work.
And how it has helped them in their relationships.
Relax and enjoy the show.
This is an epic episode with the equally epic Greg Ellis.
It is, and we could have quite happily probably spoken to him all week. Because, I mean, apart from anything else, he's such a good friend. But I have to say, he's probably one of the most interesting people that I know.
And wise.
So wise. So, yeah, we could have carried on doing this till the cows come home.
So we really hope you enjoyed this episode.
And what we should give him, I was going to say you could give the devil his due. I guess that would be inappropriate. We should give him his due respect, is what I want to say. And perhaps, I don't know if we're allowed to read off some of the people that he's worked for. The ones that I can think of, Billy Idol, because I was kind of a Billy Idol fan back in the day.
Me
in
too.
The 80s.
I had no idea we had the same musical interest back in the 80s.
The White Wedding, I loved that track.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
And then who else? Mickey Hart, my goodness, one of the greatest percussionists of all time.
Juno Reactor.
Kodo, Japanese percussion ensemble.
And then Zakir Hussain, who's an Indian tabla virtuoso.
Yeah, I mean it's an extraordinary list, and there are many more. And then on the film score front.
Well, wait a second. I was going to say that his music spans from rock and roll all the way to Indian classical music. That's quite the range, and he's played with artists in more than 30 countries.
Well, excuse me. You'll pipe my head off.
Sorry.
Can I now talk about the film scores? I think that 300 that was a classic for its genre, and then what can I say about the Matrix movies, Revolution, and the Matrix Reloaded? What else has he done?
Iron Man.
I mean, we could go on and on and on. Argo. The list goes into infinity in terms of the work that he's done in that field.
That's quite a big number, infinity.
Well, I like hyperbole.
You do. But not only that is his interest in healing, which I think is really a huge crossover in terms of the music that he's using on our podcast.
And we get to reap the benefits of this uber-talented virtuoso master musician on our podcast. How cool is that?
I know, we were really fortunate that he had the time to work on the podcast for us, because normally he'd be performing.
And under any normal circumstances, if it hadn't been for the pandemic, his dance card would have been full in no uncertain terms. So we really lucked out.
Absolutely. And you get to luck out listening to this episode because it's such a deep, rich exploration of some pretty philosophical points, wouldn't you say?
I would say it was a veritable smorgasbord of Greg Ellis wisdom.
How do you say smorgasbord?
Smorgasbord.
I don't think it ends in a G.
Of course it ends in a G. What else does it end in?
I thought it ended in a D.
Smorgasbord. Smorgasbord. Well, I think that's the American derivation. It's the It's taken from the German. Goodness knows I don't know German, but it's smorgasbord, isn't it? Smorgasbord.
We'll have to look it
We'll
up.
have to look it up.
Yes, it was a veritable array of delicious nuggets of information, and really, like I said, got me reflecting on the impact of natural sounds on the body and for healing, how we are all so impacted by this construct of time and tend to live our lives in alignment with that rather than our natural rhythms. And we also had a really somewhat paradoxical exploration of optimism.
Yeah, well, to be a whole lot less articulate than you, I would say it blew my mind.
That's probably a better way of saying it.
And hopefully it'll blow yours.
Enjoy the episode. It would be great for our listeners to hear a little bit more about your journey with music and the role, because the role that music plays in the podcast is so huge. Like we really, Angus and I felt that your contribution just up-leveled everything that we were doing and amplifies sort of the healing potential that's happening. So it's like, who is this man, Greg Ellis? Who's the man behind the music?
Oh, wow. It's amazing how perfect the fit was. And I've had the rhythm tonics. Well, I'll explain first. So the rhythm tonics, the music that you hear on the podcast, are from a set of 7 CDs I recorded in 2005 called Rhythmpharm, like a rhythm pharmacy. And the CDs are called Rhythm Tonics. And the tracks are dosages, and the instruments are ingredients. And this is really meant to be a pharmacy of rhythm. Recording them in 2005, this was still, a couple years before streaming was happening. So we had hard copies of CDs. CD booklets had maps of where the instruments come from. No synthetic sounds, no synthetic materials, meaning all the instruments are organic, made out of organic material. And I then blended all these ingredients into what I call the rhythm tonics. So when you approached me to do some music, we were originally thought initially that, well, let's use the tonics. Mm-hmm. And what is interesting is, of course, what it brings out in, I think, the emotion of the show and allowing this kind of like breath in between certain sections. But the way your sessions are so organic and allowed to be free in that sense actually makes the tonics more revealing in that way. And so I think the listeners are feeling this, and you're getting now another dose of sound that's as real and here for you and really wanting to be of service. I just don't think that's common in music anymore.
Yeah.
That could be guaranteed, where you knew everything you were listening to had to be recorded by a musician doing that. Mm-hmm. When that's not known, and it could just be literally a button pushed. Mm-hmm. So I think what happens in the podcast with the tonics, it creates it so it doesn't become strenuous over, 60 or 90 minutes on some of them. It's just like that's your little breath of air as it goes along. And I find them when I listen back to them when we're done editing and I've put the music in, and you do that final check, that it rarely feels tedious. It feels just enough.
Yeah.
So those are the sips of water in between. Who knows? We can't get how many analogies to come up with. But.
Well, I've got an analogy for you.
Of course you do.
Because I feel like this is analogous really for me on so many levels with what was really important to me And what resonated with me most about this understanding, which is something that I kept hearing when I was trying this hat on for science, if I even want to do this work in this field, was to really speak from your grounding. And that was a term that was used to sort of really, what it was suggesting was just really be your pure and honest self and come from there. Tell your stories, share your metaphors, just come from your heart and speak from there. And with that information, when I started, I was constantly comparing myself to other people. Oh, I've got to be like that guy. I've got to be like them. I've got to be slick, and I've got to be able to drop roomy quotes left, right, and center. So I was constantly comparing myself to others. And in a sense, it's like, yeah, perhaps in those early days, I would show up and kind of follow the company line and maybe rehash a story that I'd heard or a teaching point that, maybe someone else had shared. But it wasn't really until I decided, you know what, I'm just going to show up and be me, and then see the validation of that I'm actually, people are responding to that so much more than me following the company line. And then I just started to observe that in other people, like people who would teach seminars or public speakers. I would observe what was the most resonant for the audience, and it was always that person that was sharing from the heart in real time. And what I started to realize is what the audience are responding to is just the pure honesty of it all, that is enough, and that's what people like. And I see that in your music. You've created music that's just so honest and pure and organic, and it has to be pointing in the same direction. Ultimately, I feel that people just resonate with that. You don't want to hear something that's synthetic or processed, which is really kind of how I probably showed up in the early days, was probably pretty synthesized and processed. It was a synthesis of other people's ideas.
Right.
When I showed up and shared my ideas, that's something new and original, and it's honest, and people like that. So that would be the way that I see it. Kind of all kind of works together so beautifully in terms of what you just shared.
Could you say a little bit more about your philosophy around the tonics? I know you touched on it, but I think there's just so much richness there in terms of understanding more about how tonics can be a pharmacy.
We don't look at sound in the same way we look at other things we ingest. So visual and smell and taste have all kinds of kind of rules and regulations about them, of what's offensive or what's pleasant. There's prestige of this level of flavor as opposed to that level of flavor. A certain restaurant serving a third of the amount of food yet charging 3 times more because of the prestige of the chef. Like all these things about the level of ingredients you get and the level of talent with which what one does with those ingredients, you pay top dollar for. Music's never had that. Music is equalization. So a Sex Pistols record or CD back in the day was the same price as Beethoven's Ninth. Now, to some, that value could go either way. Someone may say, that the Sex Pistols are completely undervalued there. But for the most part, you would think that Beethoven would cost more than the Sex Pistols. So, but everything was equalized. It was a $5 LP or $12 CD or, now a 99-cent file that doesn't ever get paid anyway, but so it's even devalued to nothing now, where it's all free.
Yeah,
you would never have that kind of sense of any other form of art, of just thinking, oh, do you mind if I take this painting off your wall and go make a copy of it so I can hang it in my house? You would never devalue the original work like that. So I started thinking in this way of how sound and digital recording back in the early 2000s was not just affecting what I heard as the sound of the music and affecting what I call the nutrition of the frequencies. It was really shifting and taking away the role of that musician having to reach that point of understanding, of being the deliverer of this and that responsibility, and taking that seriously. And very, very, very quickly, the value of the nutrition of music in a way of real emotional content and the achievement it takes to become a musician within 2 or 3 years, literally, was completely scrapped away in the late 90s and then early 2000s. But what I also saw is that as the musician was being taken away, so was the musician's instruments. And the instruments were being replaced with synthetic replicants that couldn't embody the inherent resonant frequency of a musician playing an instrument. And these instruments were also part of what delivered that nutrition of the frequency. When digital sound libraries and loop stations came in, all you literally had to do was to hold down a key on your keyboard, and there's the sound and the rhythm being played at whatever tempo you want, numerous different feels. This wasn't a synthesizer where a keyboard player still had to play it. This was something doing it for you. So I was initially angry because of the work it took away from me, drum machines and things like this. Drummers were literally being replaced by machines. The cost of a drum machine was the cost of a good drummer for one day in the studio. And nobody was caring. The audience didn't care. And I don't blame the audience, because that was all the audience was given. They were conditioned. So I really wanted to see how much music I could really create with just my percussion instruments and using only rhythm, meaning no melody. And I challenged myself to record on only my organic instruments, meaning natural skin, bone, shell, clay, metal, no plastic skin, nothing looped or sampled, or no metronomes or click tracks, and really just play. So I put a mic up, I'd play an instrument for 10, 15 minutes. I wouldn't listen to what I just did. I'd go to another track, play another instrument to that. Would layer 3 or 4 times when it could still be improvisational, that I wasn't composing. And once I basically learned the track and started doing compositional choices, then I said it was done. I didn't want it to be a composition. I want it to be this sense of discovery. So all these things used to be, in the studios of back in the day, you would get a vibe in the studio, be lighting candles and tapestries and all this stuff. It seems ridiculous now because you can go in and fix anything. There's no vibe you're catching.
Right.
You're just catching data. You're catching information that you're going to manipulate digitally somehow later, right? So I really just wanted to have something available for a listener to be able to access music in real time, instruments played in real time, and instruments that also had certain properties and aspects to them that are healing. So it became 5.5 hours of 7 CDs of rhythm, pure organic rhythm, completely off the click. And that's, I think, what I'm most proud of, is to offer one source of something that can go that long without hearing a click track. And this is going to affect you differently than other music. Always trying to remove myself as being any kind of guru or healer. A music therapist, to me, is an oxymoron. It's like music is therapy when done right. If the musician is honest in their music and honest with the sound they're generating, it will absolutely affect people directly and personally on a cellular level. No other medication can do this. Immediate. It doesn't have to come on. It doesn't have to take hold. What we've been steered into in our technology of our devices and everything now is we have no choice. This is what you're going to be fed and you're going to like it. And we do. No blame to the audience, and no judgment to the music, no judgment to young musicians who have to press buttons. My heart goes out to them. So the tonics really became more of a oasis, actually. Connecting it back to the podcast, I feel like you reveal these components in the music by the nature of your discussion also having that same intention. So it's fascinating to me to see how intention, when reflected against another form with intention, both those intentions are magnified in a way. And so it becomes symbiotic. It really does. And so the podcast has really let me use them in a way that they were originally intended, as being something I would dispense. And I really, where the breaks are, I really choose each tonic specifically. If it ends with a laugh or if it ends with something heartfelt, then I know which tonic to go to. So they do become little dosages in that way, in the way I've used them. So it's been an amazing platform to explore them with, and really, it was really enjoyable for me.
I'm so glad we're doing this podcast episode as well, because the people listening don't know what they're getting.
Right.
And I think that to sort of spell it out also helps them to realize that they're not just being impacted by how amazing Angus and I are, but they're being impacted in a way that they don't even realize, because it's just embedded in the episode in terms of how you've added that composition to it.
And we did take the model of the NPR shows that have the music bumpers, as I call it, in between. I've actually had a lot of my music licensed for NPR and BBC radio and things to be used as the music in between, not the tonics, because I don't really share those in that way, but other recordings that I've released over the years where they'll use it. But we use that model, and when those are done well, when the vibe of the music really supports the vibe of the guest or the show, there's just, what is that works in there, where you just have this little musical interlude for 30 seconds, and it's just like, it feels kind of professional too, you know? So I thought it really, what it did was allow you guys to have, sorry I said guys. Now I gotta say, on this last episode, Michael ended it with, thanks you guys.
There you go.
And also with Judy and Christine, how they called themselves that we're two old broads, we can say anything. So I thought, now wait, would Rohini have called out Angus if he says, so the next two old broads we have coming up? Because they're referring to themselves like that. Yeah. So I started thinking there is a middle ground here. I think guys maybe has risen above its literal meaning as a vernacular, the way something being queer is, or feeling gay or something. Yeah. Like, no, those words have risen above what their initial meanings are. So contextually, it can have a little leeway. I only stopped because of the prior episodes that I know so well that I remember everything you guys talk about, you guys. But so I bring it up now, but I don't think I would have mentioned that had you guys not brought it up.
Yeah.
And here I am saying it. So, but I'm aware of it now.
Yeah.
I think that's what's important.
Yeah.
You know, the pronouns and all that. It's just be aware of it. If it affects them, wouldn't you want to make them as comfortable as possible?
Yeah.
Somebody who wants to have this as their name or identity, how does that affect us?
Yeah.
And why do we get so hung up? So anyway, that was just my little
That's a good point.
It's kind of funny too, somehow within that distillation of that awareness is that you have those moments that feel really awkward. And I can think of an occasion with my mom. You know, my mom was, I think, born in the 20s.
She was?
I think so, yeah. So she had which I guess shows my age. My goodness.
Are you 100? Did you lie to me?
We'll talk about that later. Anyway, moving swiftly on. So I remember, you know, this sort of the term gay sort of, you know, appeared on the scene to her, and just for her, you know, meant something altogether different for her age and the environment that she grew up in. So she got introduced to this terminology, and there was this idea you could either be straight or you could be gay. Mm. So my mum, who was very much involved in the local church and the Mothers Union. I think she might have even been ahead of the Mothers Union for a while. So I think it was incumbent upon her when a new curate appeared on the scene. Like, the curate is like the second in command to the vicar, who's basically a priest, and was doing the rounds, visiting, you know, the local parish. And so my mum invited him in for tea. They sat down for tea, and the first thing that she said to him as he sat down said, "So, are you straight?" And then she said, under normal circumstances, that would be a perfectly reasonable thing to ask of anyone, because what she was trying to ascertain was like, has he got himself straightened out? Has he got his house straightened out? That was her meaning of straight. God. But I had introduced her to this whole new meaning of straight, which made her literally go bright red. And she realized what she'd said, but didn't make any kind of accommodation for that fact. And this guy, this curate, just looked really uncomfortable, didn't know how to answer it. And just
clearly he wasn't straight.
I guess not.
Oh, no. Scandal at the church.
How could she be so direct? But I just thought of that, you know, just in terms, it's like, for me now, moving forward, maybe I'll have those awkward moments where, I shouldn't be saying guys here. It's like, what do they think?
I've had those awkward moments hearing myself say it.
And I think if just bringing it up, though, I'm aware of this.
Yeah.
I'm sorry it's not clicked in after, 50 plus years of saying you guys, like, referring to, but when, you know, you put it like that, if the group of guys are hanging out, it's like, hey, you girls, and you're like, no.
Well, you have spoiled it for me now, because I know now that in actual fact what's happening is it's actually puts me in a situation where I'm kind of like, I'm not present in that moment because I'm worrying about the fact that I've said guys. So I was actually confronted with a situation with two women the other day where I said, hi, you guys. And then, you know, rather than actually engage socially and be present with them, I'm like, oh God, I shouldn't have said that. Yeah, well, what are they thinking? So now I need to really take it out of my vernacular so I don't have those moments.
Right. That's what I'm noticing as well. And then you see how much you say it. It's like, oh, that is a filler. That doesn't really describe what's real. So I've started to break down the whole like language of it anyway.
One of the other areas that I know we've talked about is how you talk about music and time and how the metronome was introduced into it. And I'd love for you to share more about that philosophy that's come to you around that.
When you record in the studio, you use what's called a Clicktrack. It's a digital metronome that all recording sessions, film sessions, everything's locked to a Clicktrack. It's that beep, 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 beep. That's called a Clicktrack. In the studio in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, the Clicktrack started coming into play because you're playing with synthesizers that were programmed. So you're playing to something playing already with the mechanical clock. So you had to adhere to that mechanical clock. So you would just have a beep, 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 beep of the tempo of the track. But the other musicians didn't necessarily have to listen to the Clicktrack. They could listen to the drummer because the drummer was listening to the Clicktrack. So they were still being judged on their performance with each other, the vibe they would have with the drummer, because they're not hearing this incessant Clicktrack. Meanwhile, as the drummer, you're putting on headphones, and all you hear is this Clicktrack. And now the band starts playing, and your instrument is loud as well, so you have to turn the Clicktrack up really loud, at the expense of the other instruments, because you're being now judged completely on your performance with the Clicktrack. What this did was take away the drummer's natural rhythmic sensibility as a musician to decide not just the tempo of a track, but also there are spots where you may want to push it and pull it, meaning speeding up and slowing down. For instance, if I'm recording a song, the click won't allow that when you reach the second chorus, you want it to push a little bit because the song's really paying off at that point. So I need to push it a little bit there. It creates energy, and a good drummer knows how to do this. You pull it back on the verse, you push it on the chorus. This is feel. It's groove. You know, it was never questioned until the Clicktrack comes in. You can visually now see the sound file as well. It's not magnetic tape, so you're just trusting your ears. You see the actual sound wave. There's the bass drum. There's the Clicktrack. It's off.
Wow.
Even if by just a few milliseconds, you could see that it was off, and that overruled trusting what your ears heard. Well, close your eyes. Do you hear it? I don't care if I hear it. It's off. We started trusting our eyes more than our ears.
So it just takes all the intuition out of music.
Yeah, exactly. And I honestly believe that removing a natural sense of rhythm, a drummer's natural sense of time in music, is what led to us having to adhere to a Clicktrack in all aspects of our lives. Every device, every phone we have is on the exact same time, which means that's a Clicktrack of 60 beats a minute. And we are all moving to it right in step. And maybe when life feels like it's getting predictable and we don't feel like we have choices, maybe you just need a dose of real time. Nature doesn't have this standardized mechanical time that every species has to adhere to. When you have a mayfly that lives for 24 hours and a giant redwood that can live for 4,000 years, those are two very different time systems. And neither one is being judged as being out of time with the other. The metronome was the first device where a musician's performance was judged against a machine. You were literally not a good musician if you can't play to the metronome. And that thinking paved the way for the Clicktrack in modern music to control the things the way it does. But this really isn't about the way music sounds or feels today. Music is the vehicle I use to explore these ideas. But what I'm really concerned about is the loss of our natural sense of time. When you go into nature, that's what you don't have. You don't see a tree with a metronome or a clock next to it of where it needs to be in its evolution. Yeah. So that's the long way around, I think, probably what you were.
No, I love that answer.
That's beautiful. It's kind of like music's gone from farm to table to sort of being this very sort of overly processed food processed. Where all the taste has been taken completely. Out of it.
And if you just start with compression then is something that compression would be taking my 192-bit files and compressing them down to 16 bits. But in recording, compression is something you do to squash the signal, which I don't do with the two of you. I caught myself. Because some of the dynamics are really drastic, meaning that sometimes it's very loud and sometimes it's very soft. So a straight compression, which will bring all the lower levels up and squash the higher levels so everything becomes one steady level, it doesn't work with some of your sessions because of the dynamic range. So I have to go in individually of each little spike, and I lower it and bring the low ones up. So I do it organically, and that just takes a little more time. Wow. But even on that level, you're hearing the full range of your emotions and your guest's emotions. Mm-hmm. So that's like a soil additive I'm not using. That goes to the very beginning of it. Yeah. Just that alone is rare these days. Yeah. If not, it just doesn't exist.
Absent,
of no compression. So we compress our emotions, I think, in a very similar way because our sound is so compressed. So these things can be analogies, but they're also literal. A compressed sound hits the body differently than a wide open sound. Mm-hmm. And a compressed emotion doesn't exhibit the full dynamic range of what we're actually feeling. And with so much of our daily lives and everything we experience being processed and compressed in this way, it removes the need for the commitment of really owning what we feel in any moment, and that we don't have to commit to any change that we want to achieve. So technology in that way has really enabled us to resist the heavy lifting, to not do the grunt work in the process of creating the art, of creating the sound. For instance, in Photoshop, when you can just use an app to change any filter or any exposure you want, unlike working in a darkroom when you actually have to commit to your changes and not be able to pull back a photo that's totally washed out. But with an app, it's just don't save the changes and you're right back here where you started from. There's no challenge or commitment there, no sense of danger. So of course you're not going to discover something about yourself.
Yeah. The world that we live in is so much about creating a standardized set of rules that can really create a society that is efficient in, I don't know, keeping the machinery going, keeping consumption going. And so much, I think, of what we're sharing, I now feel like this is so analogous, even more so than I ever imagined, just listening to you talk about it, how we kind of get lost in our critical mind, and everything about society is to celebrate the critical mind at the expense of intuition.
Right.
And so there is this rule book that we all have to follow inside our head. It's this imaginary checklist that we want to tick all the boxes. And it's kind of like, that's like living to the Clicktrack.
Right.
And it's just like, let's break free from that. So, I love the marriage that we've kind of created. It's so perfect for everything that you've just said. That's so exciting.
Well, I'd like it to be a model for new cross-pollination of these platforms. So you're offering a podcast on rewilding love and relationships and the whole concept of rewilding, that why not have the music be something that's also exhibiting that idea of rewilding? And that way you get a fuller sense of the experience, I think, almost on a subliminal level. It doesn't have to be something that's marketed or advertised, but it's in there. And we've received many comments from listeners of the show that feel this and that can hear that and feel something different and appreciate it. So it definitely gets through.
I love the crossover, though, in terms of what you're talking about. Time doesn't exist in that way in nature, and the way that when you were playing without the click track, there was that room for your intuition and the feel. And in terms of our work with rewilding and asking people to listen to their inner wisdom and get a feel for it, because it comes with a feel. Like we know when we're listening to that inner wisdom, right. We know when we're not. And that's not emphasized usually. And that your work and what you're doing and your music is pointing to that in a different way than we're pointing to that, but we're pointing to the same thing. Yeah. We're pointing people to that place within themselves where it's timeless, where they're connecting with that, where they have an experience of that, where they get out of the conditioning and they get into the realness that doesn't have a click track right. to it. Right. I mean, it's so powerful.
It is an interesting point because you're rewilding a relationship, you're rewilding an ecosystem from where your metaphor comes from. But what you're doing by rewilding anything is allowing it to have its own time. Mm-hmm. If you put that wolf back in the woods and now all the things that preyed upon it and it preyed upon and all the flowers it stomped and over time balances out and we have now the proper ecosystem. So rewilding anything is basically allowing its own time to process and evolve and grow and inhabit itself. I just think that a lot of the New Age movement has kind of co-opted these ideas in ways that are compressed in the same way that we were talking about earlier in terms of getting rid of all the dynamic nuances of the ideas that are being presented. So I love the term rewilding because it's not based on anything of like belief or spirit energy or these other things that are really hard to define. I think much easier to know than they are to define. If you know it, you have it, and you don't really need to talk about it. So if you're talking about it, I'm going to question it because I don't think it's anything that needs to be talked about, that we have to identify through a belief system. So rewilding anything is just allowing your own natural process to take over. And that's really giving it its own time. So don't keep looking at the clock. Oh, it's been 2 weeks. I expected to be further along now. No. What if you're a tree and not a mayfly?
Exactly. And also in that idea of time, what we see happen in an intensive, it's like time disappears right. in the way that we set up that work. What happens in, let's say it's a 4-day increment of time, is it far exceeds what you would expect to happen within that time because we get into that timeless space. We all sort of drop out of time. And it's not like when I was in a therapy office and I hated the 50-minute hour. And I was like, I hated it. Yeah. And it's like, okay, I'm going to, and then of course, in order to make it work economically, you're supposed to book back to back to back. So if you didn't do a 50-minute hour, you're in trouble. Right. And so being able to work with people in an intensive format where there's nobody else coming in. You get to spend as long as you want to spend with them. There isn't that click track ticking that has, permeated all aspects of life where you just get to have that organic process of healing unfold. It's so beautiful. And even now when I'm doing follow-up sessions or my other sessions with clients, I just don't book back to back because I don't want to know when I'm going to end a session. Even if it's, meant to be a 90-minute session, if we're done at 30 minutes, we're done at 30 minutes. Right. If we're, booked for 60 minutes, but you're still in the middle of it, I haven't booked someone, typically, I might sometimes, but usually I don't book back to back because I don't like working to the clock in that way.
Especially with your kind of work where it's all about this kind of blossoming and revealing and that kind of process that has a lot of elements of protocol that have to be in place for that to even happen. As you're saying that, I was thinking of all these reality shows of competitions are all based on the clock. How many times this brilliant artist or brilliant baker was completely foiled because of the time. So you're not looking for the best British baker. You're looking for the quickest. You're looking for the one who's basically going to bring it in on time, because the one that needs another 10 minutes where you would have had the best hot cross buns you've ever had. So think of our forms of entertainment in that way, of up against the clock. We're conditioned to expect it now. And maybe it would almost feel weird to a patient to not have that cutoff point, or a client to not have that cutoff point, when you're so conditioned for the clock to control the experience and then it's removed. It can be very unsettling, and I think we need to discover or rediscover that sense of ourselves that is comfortable with that. I think there's a lot we need to rediscover about ourselves. I think we've been consumed with the idea of self-help, but I think self-help, it's had its time. I think we need to get to self-discovery. I don't think we need help.
Yeah.
We need to know who we are, and we need to realize why the hell does this still happen? How did the last 4 years happen in a way that in that amount of time, this divisiveness is going on? We don't need help to deal with that. We need to discover something about ourselves that may be hard to see, but we've got to face it. And I've always joked that if there was any self-help book that ever worked, it would be the last self-help book written.
Right.
Right, exactly.
But I mean, of course they can be beneficial, and of course self-help is needed in some cases. If I'm on a broken leg, I can't help myself limp. I need somebody to do that for me. If I have a tourniquet that needs the pressure on and I'm passing out because I've lost so much blood, I can't help myself there. So I feel that self-help in a lot of ways actually can reinforce the idea that you need help when what you really need to do is discover something about yourself. And in terms of humanity, we need to discover why we keep hitting these walls. And maybe this last year has finally revealed that in a way that we can't ignore. I'm finding it out right now of just really feeling like, why are we here? You know, not existentially, why this planet and this solar system. Literally, why are we still here? We clearly have done such harm and such terrible things, but we also must be doing something that is of a deeper purpose than we can even imagine or recognize right now. The human species is like Keith Richards, like, how is it still going? And somehow he's there, you know,
Yeah.
still doing it. It's still as cool as ever. It's like, really? You know? And I just think we need to discover that resilience and also focus on that thing that we have been doing right and what has thrived regardless of the obstacles we've tried to create. And I think we're also needing a desperate dose of pure truth, undeniable truth. Now that's the next victim of this technology, where I think the idea of time being the first, the second's going to be our sense of truth and what's real. And that's been taking a devastating hit the last years. Who would have thought that really, like, I can show you this or read you this and you can say, no, that's just not true, when there's no question that it is.
Right.
And so when I say, why are we here? Like, you mean, how did we get here by being so deceptive? A lion's not hiding in the tree pretending to be a jaguar to leap on something. There are tools that animals use as maybe to create an imposter syndrome in a sense. But it's going to be a tool. It's like the circles on the back of a moth that make it look like that's its face. I don't consider that trying to be something different. That's a tool of itself it's using that creates that illusion. So maybe we need to create an illusion that we're something more than we are. And then we start believing that illusion of ourselves, that maybe we are more than we are, or maybe we're not enough of who we are.
Yeah.
Something's going to shift here. Let's do this. Let me find the information that resonates with me and let me make sense of it. And let me do something with it in a way that's not to prove it to you. That to me is going to be exciting to see when we start becoming aware on that level of what's really causing our interactions to feel ingenuine are these two things. I think it's the fabrication of truth and the fabrication of time that could never be brought into question.
Right.
So clock, printing press, metronome, Clicktrack, digital technology. Those would be my markers.
The order.
Oh, that's incredible.
It really is the two things that keep us out of fear. The hard work that most of us go through of what it takes to really achieve a relationship that has that sense of time and truth embedded in it, that there's no pressure of either.
Yeah.
We're not running out of time here. Our time's not threatened. I'm not going anywhere. And this is who I am.
Yeah.
So if you think of time and truth in that way, those two things threatened no wonder we're having such a difficult time really understanding where we all fit in right now.
Yeah. And I really appreciate your confidence in the resilience that we can discover ourselves, that we're capable, and that we just need to be looking in that direction. Because even though Angus and I work with others and are of service to others, we're really only pointing them to look within themselves. And it's amazing to think that that's our job,
Right.
because that's what we're doing. But it's not the norm for people to be told that.
It's not. And I think, again, it gets lumped in with an idea of, belief or optimism or faith or something like that. This is an optimism of things working out for me in the last 30 years of my career. This is optimism of 13 billion years of our evolution. That's what fascinates me more. It's not anything I've achieved or not achieved.
Yeah.
But as a species, we're still running this thing as we're destroying it, which means there's something really amazing there that may be misdirected or maybe exactly what's supposed to be happening. Maybe that's just revealing that part of us that has to be discovered, and now we're going to be able to you wouldn't figure out a cure for COVID or a cure for polio until there was an outbreak.
Right.
So maybe this is the outbreak of that part of us that has to be discovered, and now we're going to know how to deal with it, because everything else until now has just been a little pimple of this cyst underneath that's clearly there.
Yeah.
So trusting our own resilience of survival and thrive as a species, we have to acknowledge what we're bad at too. And that's the age I think we're in. I think we've got to face what we're bad at. And that's really politically, environmentally, emotionally. We don't show the tools of survival the way most every other parent in nature does. We give our sense of what tools we were given and not given, and going to devise this concoction to give to our kids as this is what it needs to be. And I'm thinking, well, maybe that's because we don't have the time to do it. Maybe because we do have to deliver this kid at 3 years old to preschool and 5 years old to kindergarten, and on it goes for the next 12 years, and then college. And when does this kid have any chance to show you who they really are? Without the clock, I think we have a much better group of people taking care of each other.
Yeah. Without that pressure, that whether it's something external or whether it's just perceived within ourselves, just I think what you're pointing to is how most people are living with a constant internal pressure and hum of anxiety and insecurity. And then we make strange choices based on that. And we're like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
But it makes sense when we're caught up in the noise of that.
That's interesting.
Yeah. It's a fascinating topic. I think that one of the things that was coming up for me as you were sharing, and I actually had a conversation with a client earlier today who was referencing a good friend of theirs who had gone through a tremendous amount of adversity, like one thing after the other, horrific things had happened, and they had come out the other side and had all this wisdom at their disposal. So as you were talking, I was thinking about, that example you used of like, we're kind of like Keith Richards in our current state of evolution. Like, how are we still here? But in a sense, it's almost like the human race kind of like come up against what feels like a precipice, like COVID, you could say was a precipice. We come up against COVID. Who knows what will come out of it? But there is this incredible resilience. Who knows what will come out of global warming, where that eventually takes us? It's almost like, when I was a student, I'd always be leaving it until the last minute before I would actually study for the exam. It feels like we kind of do that in terms of the way the clock is ticking. We leave everything until the last minute to address the problem. But nevertheless, when we do address the problem, we're pretty amazing at doing exactly that. I think about this client earlier today talking about their friend. I think about a client that I worked with a few years back when I was asked to work with his son, and the son was dealing with a really, really difficult medical condition of which the prognosis was bad. And at one point, I think he was 21 when I talked to him at 12, he was pretty much staring death straight in the face. And for me, and what he had learned and what he shared about what he had learned, this session was for me, not for him. I was being coached by him, by a 21-year-old. He had learned the real value in being present, not living by the clock, but really like to survive and have this life that really, the prognosis of which didn't really have any longevity attached to it. He knew that he had to live in the present. It's like something that's baked into all spiritual philosophy. It's there, this the power of the present and, living your life that way. He had really harnessed that and figured it out. And I think that happened through having to go through this tremendous amount of adversity. Like here he is staring his mortality in the face. He kind of figured that out on his own. And I thought that was extraordinary. But we do have this tremendous capacity to do exactly that. And I do like to look at the intelligence behind life, the GPS system of which is the intuition. It's like we have the resources at our disposal, and yet whatever it is, our ego, our critical mind has decided, no, I'm going to take the wheel here. And it's distilled itself into some sort of societal machinery which produces a Clicktrack or whatever. But that takes us away from that resource that is always there to bail us out. Whatever frigging disaster we face, it's there to bail us out, and that's our resilience. And we can figure it out ultimately.
So that becomes then our new sense of optimism. Is really like, it's so bad now that it's in any moment the best of us will come out.
Yeah. Oh, really?
There was the documentary on Mr. Rogers that came out. Won't You Be My Neighbor? I think it was, right? And one of I remember the clips on NPR, they were interviewing the filmmaker, and then I eventually saw the movie. But the question was asked of him, how do you tell kids about natural disasters, about something that's out of their control, and tornadoes or earthquakes and things, when they're seeing it on the news? And he would say, show them that the people that are helping, show them the heroes. And he said, basically, you just let them know that with every disaster or tragedy comes out the best in people. Maybe that's it. Maybe there is this innate trust that we have that, it's going to go to hell anyway. And until it does, we won't see the best of us. I think we have definitely reached that point where this is starting. And that's ultimately where I think my optimism comes from. That's really fascinating, Angus, to seeing it like that.
Yeah.
The entertainment of zombies and apocalypse and everlasting battles is all about always disaster at the helm. And what if that is actually the part of us that is fully aware the best will arise?
Yeah.
Every artist I know who works on professional jobs and has to deliver that work by a deadline does their best work in the last hours of the deadline.
Yeah.
The time expands to fill the job provided is what we always would say.
Yeah.
So if you have 2 hours, but all of a sudden it's expanded to 3, your best work will be in that third hour. What if it stayed at 2 hours? Your best work would have been in the second hour.
Right. Interesting, isn't that? Because in a sense, it's like in that final hour, you get to a point where you just do not have the luxury of rumination, of worrying about how badly or well it's going. You just have to show up and just perform.
And like you said, we can't ruminate on the past. We have to accept the truth of the moment that we're in. So in relationships, we can get attached to our sense of what we feel is true, but it's not actually the truth. So the tools I'm looking for are not the ones to create an outcome or resolution, like we said earlier. The tools I'm looking for are the ones that get me through that natural disaster where I can find the best of myself.
Yeah.
And let myself step away from it if that's what it needs.
Yeah.
This is what we cover in every episode, is reaching that point, the sweet spot, like you say. And what these principles do give is a format for that, just like the technique of certain patterns that I would play on a drum set. These are all rudiments that I put together to create one cohesive phrase, like an alphabet. And that's what I think these principles deliver. Is it gives you building blocks, which is simplified. I think it is more of an alphabet, but it just is 3 letters, basically. You don't need more. I think these 3 things that I'm addressing here of time, truth, and experience as being 3 things that can seem complex and confusing at times when you look at them all together, but you find a way to break it down to the lowest common denominator. This is something I do in with rhythms all the time, and certainly rhythms in other cultures that use what are called odd time signatures. When you're playing in an odd time signature means it's an odd number of beats in a measure. So instead of a regular beat being 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, an odd time would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that sounds strange compared to a basic 4/4 rhythm, and certainly to the ears in the West. In other cultures, there's numerous rhythms in odd time, in 5s and 7s and 9s. So instead of counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I break all these rhythms down to 3s and 2s. A 7 is just 2 2s and a 3. 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2. Now it's a groove. Bop, bop, boom, boom, bop, bop. So now the odd time signature becomes a groove, and it becomes something that feels natural. But when you're counting 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, so you break it down. So a 10/8 rhythm would be 2 3s and 2 2s. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2. 6 and 4 is 10. So it's all math. So there is everything breaks down to 3s and 2s. So I use this same approach if I'm dealing with something complex or confusing that doesn't seem like it's right or feels unnatural to me. I just tend to find a way to break them down. Like, where's the 3 and 2 here? Where's the accent on this? And what that does is allow me to find the way that it feels right, not the way to prove that I'm counting it right. So you seek out what's real. You seek out the way to feel something that makes it feel natural. You don't seek out the proof of these things. You don't seek out the proof of what resonates with you and what is substantial about it, what's real about it.
And it's not about proving it, it's about the lived experience of it.
Experience. It's not this thing we achieve, it's in us. So there's an area of research called somatics, and somatics is the study of sound and frequency made visible. They'll use a metal plate and pour some sand on it. Underneath the metal plate is a speaker that will play a frequency or a tone. And when it hits a pitch, the sand will immediately disperse itself into a geometric pattern like a mandala. So the bass frequencies have a much simpler shape than the high frequencies. The higher the frequency, the higher the pitch, the more complex the shapes get. And what you are seeing is the shape of that frequency. And when you see that, you can start to understand harmonic structure in music, why some notes together sound good and create a chord, but others can be dissonant and create a rub that makes us feel unsettled. So let's say we're in an argument with our partner. The misunderstanding can escalate and continue merely because the tones of our voices are at dissonant frequencies. So no matter what you say or what I say, it never feels right because we're not in a complementary frequency. That's why finding a common practice or system or method of dealing with things in a relationship works, because you're adhering to a complementary frequency of understanding, because that understanding now has a frequency. You see, so it's really a beautiful way of seeing it, and it breaks it down in a way that's unifying. It doesn't demand anything except its awareness, and start seeing how it plays out in your life, and that's when you can tell me what it is.
I guess that's part of what we're doing with Rewilding, is we're trying to create a resonance and really looking back towards that pure sound.
Yeah, you're looking for the frequency of that feeling.
Yes.
In a sense of what brought it together. What's that complementary frequency that allowed this experience to manifest to begin with? I could be playing my piano fine, but if it gets out of tune, I'm going to need to tune it, and I may need some professional help for that. And you need a piano tuner to come tune it. But you have to tune your instrument.
Yeah.
And piano, because it's more complex than a guitar, you need a specialist to come tune it. And this guy doesn't use a machine. He's tuning it with his ear. Piano tuners are an interesting lot. He's like remembering 6 pitches below of where that tuning is and connecting it to his harmonic remembrance of that frequency. They're fascinating characters, like physicists almost, where they're relying upon the natural system of harmonic frequency and how that resonates in their bodies over looking at a device that's telling them whether or not it's in tune. Almost.
That's amazing. But think what we do in relationship without even being conscious of it. We have these incredible systems in our body, in our biology, that are picking up all kinds of tone.
Show me anything digital. Show me any version of iPhone that's more brilliant than we are. I don't see it. I appreciate it. I can even give you some of the arguments of the good that it's done. But what this is about is how unbelievably incredible we are. as a living species, just what we can do. I have not found any digital replicant of experience to come even close. It's 16 bits compared to 192,000.
And that's why I feel so optimistic, because it's like you look at the biology, the sophistication of which is just remarkable. It's just set up. It's set up to have the most optimal human experience. It's set up for success every step of the way. And we will always find, I feel that, we'll find a way through just by virtue of the fact that look at the technology. Nothing can hold a candle to it. The biological technology.
Exactly. And I think at what point do you give up, or at what point do you not want to see an outcome of life that exhibits not just how amazing you are, but how amazing we all are? There's a lot of those points. And it becomes so difficult for us to accept that we do have this dark side, that we do have this darkness we inhabit. But it is absolutely necessary and beneficial in terms of our growth. So if we get stuck in judging the darkness we're capable of, then we may not want to see that outcome. And we can become so consumed by it that we do want to just end it all right then and there. But if we don't start looking at the darkness we inhabit as being legitimate and valid and will never not be part of us, we will continue the need to exhibit it in ways that are very extreme. We will never get it understood and allow it to do its work, which is to balance out the other aspect of ourselves. And if we keep perceiving this idea that there is a sense of perfection we can achieve, it will never happen.
Yeah, and it's not about perfection, like you're saying. That doesn't exist in nature.
It doesn't exist.
And, you've heard Angus and I, all of the bits that we throw into the podcast, but it's like we don't want to present as somehow that we have it all figured out and that we have the perfect relationship and that nobody does. And that's just not natural. Yeah. But when we come back to that natural state, there's an aliveness there, there's a richness there, there's a depth there. And that's, I think, why we want to keep going. It's not about it always feeling good or looking good or being right, but there's something inside of us that enjoys the experience of being. And it doesn't really matter what that experience is because of that aliveness. And sometimes it's going to look crappy. Yeah. Sometimes it's going to feel terrible, but it's not about being comfortable. It's not about getting to that place of perfection where all of a sudden now we're just comfortable and we're not suffering. It's about where does that aliveness want to take us? And I think what you're talking about, Greg, is that it's taking us into very uncomfortable territory as a species on this planet at this point in time, as we kind of look at disaster in the face in so many different ways, but that the aliveness wants to find a way through that. And if we take it straight on, there's that brilliance that's inside of us, even though it's not perfect on one level, if we're looking at it that way. There's that creativity that we all have within us that is going to look to see what's possible here. And sometimes it takes us to be up close and personal with it before we even do anything, like you're saying with your Angus, with the procrastination. It's like, we all wait till the 11th hour before we decide to do something. Well, right now, I think, it's getting close to a lot of people's doors and closer to everybody's door at some point.
I think in some ways we're being very hard on ourselves, and then other ways we're not hard enough.
Right.
And what we're hard on ourselves with seems to be the things we can't do anything about. We're not hard on ourselves with things that we actually can take action on right now. You know, so we're not that far off. It's not like we're a distance away from this thing, right? The brain has 0.4 milliseconds thereabouts of how long it takes to translate everything. We get a black and white image through our eyes. It's actually upside down, so the brain has to turn it right side up, put color in, put dimension in, depth perception, all these things. It takes about pretty remarkable 0.4 milliseconds. What I found in work I've done with trance, which completely attacks ideas of time through rhythm, and it's not this far off distant place they get to. It's removing that 0.4 milliseconds. So it's the pure present.
Yeah.
It's literally the blink of an eye, and we're in a completely different reality. And that's all plant medicine drugs do, hallucinogenics. You see a different reality for a good 5 or 6 hours until it leaves your system. Physics defines time as the measurement of energy in motion. it says nothing about a clock. So whatever generates the motion for that energy is the timekeeper. And that's how I feel rhythm is a timekeeper. What trance does is create that rhythm as like a wave, like you ride this frequency and you arrive in the pure present. And that's all trance is being in the pure present. Everything I'm feeling right now. We feel there's this distance we have to cover to attain a lot of these sensations. I think Zen Buddhism is the only religion, if you want to call it philosophy practice, that allows for immediate enlightenment. It's called Satori, and that's when you got it. By one statement, by one act, by one understanding, you're there. If we all went off the click, what if we all turned it off?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Wow.
I was just thinking how this has been timeless. Like, this has just flowed and we've just been in one space of time.
Maybe it's a double episode. Because we threw time out the window. So.
But I love throwing time out the window.
I know. Who set this time?
Yeah, exactly.
Here we are questioning, in our discussion
Yes.
of this, we're questioning whether or not it's too long.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's no such thing. It's our podcast.
Exactly. There's no, I just feel like it's, I always thought it was an alignment, but just listening to you now, I'm just like, oh my God, this just goes so much deeper.
It does, yeah. And I did more than scratch the surface. We got into some deep stuff with it, but I always like to pull it back to show how attainable the understanding is, because it's not a practice-based understanding, it's an observational-based understanding. You have to practice observing it, not doing it.
That's great. I love that.
And that's where I think most of our practices is some form of discipline of doing and action. And what really resonates with me is the Taoist perspective of non-action.
Awareness.
This idea of non-action, I think, in the West means not doing anything, but it's not that. It's not having the action prove your sense of understanding or purpose in the situation. That idea of not having the action be the judge and jury of how we feel about ourselves and how we see our lives. It's time to release ourselves from the bondage of time. If we do feel that our soul is eternal, if we do have a spiritual practice that believes in that adheres to that, then that's the only time frame we should be thinking of, is eternity. So I think we've just given that kind of format here of like...
Yeah.
Freeform.
This is podcast off the Clicktrack.
That's right.
We'll go for as long as we want.
Off piste.
That's right.
Well, you love going off piece. Now you can have full permission.
Yeah, the whole podcast off piste.
Thank you so much for listening to Rewilding Love. If you enjoyed this podcast, please let us know by subscribing on iTunes, and we would love for you to leave a review there.
iTunes reviews will steer people to this podcast who need help with their relationships.
If you would like to learn more about our work and our online rewilding community, please visit our website, therewilders.org.
Thanks for listening. Join us next week.